right, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is Ann Schmidt as it shows on the screen, but I'm happy to present Stephen Stransky, who is going to present our Section 3 Q&A for CDBG grant administrators. So this is a follow-up from a Section 3 training that we offered back over the summer, and we're providing a little bit of additional detail at this time. We'll go ahead and go through the presentation, then have some time for questions and answers at the end. So go ahead. Oh, and it is being recorded, as you should have a note there. So we do hope to post this for anyone who might not be able to join us. Stephen?
All right, thank you, Ann. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again to go over Section 3. In today's presentation, we're just going to give a brief refresher to the rule and go over some forms that we put out since the last meeting that go over compliance with Section 3, and then we'll take some question and answers. Moving forward here, we are recording this. So again, if you're unfamiliar with Teams, this meeting will be recorded and posted to our website, and you can submit questions through the chat feature, which looks like the little WhatsApp logo there, and we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free to send me an email if you have any other questions that you would like answered more personally. You can adjust your camera and microphone settings there, but I would recommend turning your cameras off, and please remain muted throughout the presentation. We'll call on you or ask for questions, and you can unmute yourself at that time. Again, this is what the meeting chat box will look like, so you can just type down there. It's pretty similar to it's a Facebook Messenger, and we will proceed with the presentation now. Please keep yourselves muted, and we'll move forward. So starting out with a brief refresher, what is Section 3? Section 3 is HUD's legislative directive for providing preference to public housing residents and low to moderate income residents of the local community, and to businesses that are owned or substantially employ them, and also for new employment, training, and contracting opportunities resulting from HUD-funded projects. Section 3 applies to projects or activities that involve housing, such as the construction, demolition, or rehabilitation of, and other public construction projects, such as roads, sewers, community centers, etc. If you're interested in reading the rule, that can be found at 24 CFR Part 75. Previously, CDBG grant administrators submitted an annual report on the number of new hires to indicate their compliance with Section 3. They would submit this annually to Iowa grants. Since HUD updated the rule last year, Section 3 will now track labor hours instead of new hires. This applies even if a project is not subject to Davis-Bacon. And this will be submitted in a form to Iowa grants upon project closeout. We are currently building that form. The new Section 3 rule came into effect on July 1st for applicable IDA awarded projects. If you had a project that was awarded and just bid out before that date, you will still comply with the prior rule. Section 3 applies for IDA programs to upper story housing, new housing construction, and other public construction projects. It will not apply to any materials only contracts. Section 3 is triggered when you have been awarded at least $200,000 in CDBG funds. And this is applicable to relevant awards in the following IDA programs, such as for disaster recovery, for new housing, when a project will receive at least $200,000, community facilities and services, downtown revitalization, and that applies when a specific owner receives at least $200,000, not the overall community award. And similarly for upper story housing, that applies when a specific housing project receives at least $200,000, not the overall award. This also applies to water and sewer, opportunities and threats, and for CDBG CV, when construction is involved and at least $200,000 is awarded. Getting into reporting benchmarks, again, Section 3 tracks labor hours and not new hires. This is intended to provide more beneficial long-term employment opportunities to low-income people than the prior rule may have captured. For specific details, at least 25% of total project hours should be worked by Section 3 workers. And at least 5% of total project hours should be worked by targeted Section 3 workers. So if these 25 and 5% safe harbor benchmarks are met, then you have complied with Section 3. If you have not, qualitative efforts can ensure compliance. And to rephrase that, since it is very technical and can be confusing, 25% is the total for Section 3 hours, so 20% minimum of any type plus 5% by targeted Section 3 workers. And you can obviously do more hours if you are able to. Looking into the definition of a Section 3 worker, again, 25% of project hours should be completed by Section 3 workers, and they must meet one or more of the following conditions since December 1st, 2020, or within the past 5 years, whichever is later. This was something that has changed since our last presentation due to recent HUD guidance from us. So the 5-year look-back period won't begin until December 1st, 2025 in full. So a Section 3 worker is a low income for the prior calendar year, which is at 80% of the individual area median income. It's important to note that that's the individual income and not household income. We're just looking at the individual's income and not that of their household. They could also have been employed by a Section 3 business, or they could be a current youth build participant. In the chart below, I've selected some counties across the state to show you what the 80% income figures look like for 2021, along with the state average. Targeted Section 3 worker, again, 5% of the project's hours must be done by workers of this type. They meet the regular Section 3 worker criteria, but have a few more requirements. For CDBG projects, this includes a worker who's employed by a Section 3 business, or a worker who is currently hired or hired since December 1st, 2020, is verified to live within the service area of the project, or they're a current youth build participant. So pretty much this is just looking at where they live, since this targeted Section 3 workers are typically people who live within the project area. And the project service area is defined as being within 1 mile of the site, or if there's fewer than 5,000 people that live within a mile radius, then within a radius that encompasses 5,000 people. HUD does plan to release an online tool to calculate this, but in the meantime, use existing data to demonstrate this as best as possible. So the tracking of labor hours applies even if the project does not have to comply with Davis-Bacon. All hours on the project should be tracked and not just the hours of Section 3 workers, since you can't come up with the 25 and 5% benchmarks if you aren't tracking all labor hours. Hours should be tracked by the contractors and the grant administrator as the project is underway and reported to IEDA at the conclusion of the project. And our monitoring will include Section 3. We've provided templates to guide the tracking of labor hours for Section 3 projects, and these are available on the IEDA website. We have or should shortly be posting a couple of additional updated templates that we will go over here in a few slides. Looking at what are the responsibilities of recipients. Recipients or grant administrators are required to document the income of Section 3 workers through the worker self-certification form. We are required to track all labor hours on the project, including by non-Section 3 workers, through the Section 3 compliance Excel, which many of you may be familiar with the Excel we put out when we made a couple of edits to make it easier for you. You're required to document evidence of the labor hours on the project, and document any qualitative efforts that are taken to comply with Section 3. Penalties include sanctions from HUD, termination of contract for CDBG funds, and debarment of suspension from future HUD-assisted contracts. Again, these are requirements that these are penalties incurred by the state of Iowa, but we will be, if we don't get funds, you won't get funds, so we all need to work on this together. So looking at qualitative efforts, if you can't meet the 25% and 5% Safe Harbor benchmarks, then you can demonstrate compliance through qualitative efforts. These are efforts to generate low-income workers on projects. I've included a few examples here, such as outreach efforts, holding job fairs, using service providers to connect Section 3 employees with employers, and promoting the use of the Section 3 Business Registry Opportunity Portal. We will have more information.
Well, they aren't hiring anybody.
Please keep yourself muted for now. We will proceed with questions at the end of the presentation. And we will provide more information on this at the end of this presentation with the template we have for qualitative efforts. And again, I put out a presentation in June of this year. You can find it on Appendix 8 of the CDBG Management Guide. And you can also, that's where you can find more information in our templates. And you can find our presentation that I did under our CDBG Training Resources slide. And I've included links here, and we'll send out the slides after the presentation. So looking at some of the templates here that we put together, this is the Section 3 worker self-certification. This is how you'll document workers for being Section 3 or not. This is what you have to retain for documentation of that. So you'll enter the 80% one person household income for the project area, and you'll have to verify their income with what their home county's income figures are. Section 3 is concerned with the worker's home county and not necessarily the project site, so that might require just a little bit of cross-checking if they don't live in the same county as the project. If you're income eligible, then you'll verify the address to see if they're a targeted Section 3 worker or not. And again, that's living within a radius of 5,000 people of the project site. Looking at this same form, the laborers, they will write their name, they'll write or type their address, and they'll check if their income is above the figures that you provided to them. If their income is at or below that for their home county, we will look at the next steps here. They will check and see which condition applies to them, such as probably most likely they would be living within the site. But if they're employed by a business, Section 3 business, or are in youth build, they can check those things. Then they can sign and date the form. And this is how you verify their income. You don't have to necessarily review any tax statements or other documentation of that sort. It's a similar process for businesses that are Section 3. This is the form that is available on our website. The business will complete this form and return it to you. IDA considers this adequate documentation. We would encourage them to also register on the HUD Section 3 business registry as well, so that other entities and agencies can get access to their services. Looking at the compliance Excel, which is something that we went over last time, we've made a few changes, and I will go over step by step what those changes look like. This is just an overview of a form, what a sample could look like. So you'll start by typing in the project name, typing its address, and the start date of the project. Looking at, there's a second tab of the going into the Excel sheet, there are two tabs. So you can look at the second tab here to type in one person household incomes for all the counties of the workers. That might help to keep track of the income figures that we're looking at to verify if they're Section 3 or not. And I gave a couple examples here for an example project in the Des Moines area. You can see the following link to get the income limits, and that link should be updated for future years. Going back to the first tab here, to enter the worker information, you type in their ID, type in the week that they worked, type in their hours, and you My apologies, we would not type in the data initially hired. That is no longer on this form. You'll type yes or no if they are a Section 3 worker, and yes or no if they're a targeted Section 3 worker. That's all you have to do is type yes or no. There are formulas in this Excel that are indicated by the gray shaded cells. You can just leave those cells alone and they will automatically calculate for you based upon your answer of yes or no, which has to be specified as yes, yes, or info. As I said before, the worksheet will automatically calculate the sum of the labor hours total, which there are about an unlimited amount of rows you can use on this Excel sheet. It also will type in the sum of labor hours for Section 3 and the sum of targeted Section 3 hours. And you would look, and that will derive the percentages. So looking at this sample project, they were able to get 38% total labor hours for Section 3 and 8% by targeted, which of course meets the 25% and 5% Safe Harbor benchmarks. Going into qualitative efforts, since it's very likely we will have some projects that may struggle to meet the benchmarks, we've included a new checklist that includes sample items that was put out by HUB. These efforts, you should be beginning qualitative efforts at the start of the project, alongside the counting of labor hours to ensure that you are compliant with Section 3 by the time of the project closeout. All recipients should complete this regardless if you're able to meet those benchmarks, and you'll attach verifying documents and you'll be submitting this on a form on Iowa Grants, and we will let you know when that is put out. You will also, just to refresh that, you will need to track labor hours even if you don't meet the benchmarks. This will be something that's provided in case those labor hour benchmarks are not met. These are important, qualitative efforts are an important tool to ensure that compliance with Section 3 is met. These are community-based efforts. They're not necessarily something that we can do at the state level. Iowa COGS may already be conducting many of these activities, such as hosting regional job fairs, providing transportation for low-income workers, and other initiatives. And we welcome feedback on what efforts you're already doing and what help you may need to complete any other qualitative efforts if you're not already doing so. And our form does include an other box, so you can type in some other efforts that you're doing along with the checked ones that HUD provided to us. To conclude with the frequently asked questions page, based on since the rollout of the Section 3 rule on July 1st, Section 3 is based on employee income for the year. It's not based on their pay at a particular job or pay under any worker classification for Davis-Bacon or any other requirement. Worker will self-certify based on income, not including fringe benefits. And again, that's their individual income, not necessarily their spouse's income or anyone else in their household. So they could be a low-income worker married to a top-ranked surgeon, but we're just looking at their individual income. Based on recent HUD guidance, Section 3 looks back to December 1st of last year or with 5 years, whichever is later. That means the 5-year look-back period that's referenced won't be fully implemented until December 1st, 2025. Grant administrators should be conducting and keeping record of qualitative outreach efforts in conjunction with tracking labor hours. And these materials can all be found in Appendix 8 of the Management Guide, and if these two spreadsheets or these two new templates were not there, they will be there within the next day or so. If you're using any templates referencing new hires, those are not the correct forms for you to use. And please use the correct forms that are posted to the website. So with that, we will open this up to any questions you may have. I know it's kind of a lot of material to go through in a very quick time period, but we just want to hear your feedback and let you know about these new tools that we've posted based upon how the Section 3 is being rolled out. So thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'll go ahead and moderate questions that have come into the chat during the presentation. Kim asks, can you explain why it is an individual's income and not their family income She's had individual income that is low, but a family's income which is high, which would not, that typically you would not consider that person a Section 3 worker due to high family income.
That it was something that was put out in HUD's regulation when they issued the new guidance. The logic is probably we're looking at individual workers, and Section 3 is a tool to try to lift workers out of poverty using federal funded project work. So we're probably just looking at HUD's attention is most likely just looking at the individual, not necessarily the household. So in the circumstance such as that, with a household that makes a higher income, but the worker makes a low income, you will just go off of the worker's low income for Section 3 compliance.
And I would just add that it was in the rule. I mean, HUD, when they wrote this Section 3 rule, the new rule, they referenced individual income. HUD doesn't publish individual incomes, they publish household incomes, and so the best way to handle compliance is through, as Stephen presented, the one-person household income. All right, Rose asked, housing sustainability wasn't mentioned on the slide. Explain how the 200,000 threshold works for various CDBG programs. Does the same principle apply? Labor hours need not be tracked for individual, individual housing rehabs, even if the community receives a housing grant of over 200,000.
For housing rehab, it's very unlikely a project would receive over 200,000. We don't, just as with the other programs, we look just at the individual project's award, not the community award. So
HUD defines project as the location, the address, and ownership of where the funds are going. So correct, housing rehab on its own, an individual homeowner rehab would never likely trigger compliance. That should answer that. Chris says the labor hours worksheet is now changed, question mark. I'm not sure if that's a question. We have the template that Stephen provided really just eliminated the date of hire and the calculation of days because that 5-year look back isn't really applicable until 2025. So if it's not up yet, it will be up this week.
Right, so I'll just check back later this week, early next week, that it was updated for that reason we learned from HUD since our last presentation of the 5-year look back, not being a fully 5-year look back at this time.
So Mark says, do we have to use the spreadsheet for employer documentation? Can we create an Excel spreadsheet with this and other information for compliance?
I would say you can use your own individual spreadsheets at your level, but we will be looking for this spreadsheet to be submitted with our Iowa grants forms whenever they're created, just to ensure consistency and that we're all on the same page.
Since Section 3 is no longer applicable to housing, do we still need to submit Section 3 reports for housing CDBG projects? So anything that is currently under contract that falls under the old rule, that old rule, it was applicable based on the grant. So you are still required to comply with the old rule. Moving forward, new awards made after July 2021, you would not need to. If Section 3 is triggered for DTR projects, do hours have to be tracked for the whole project or only owner receiving in excess of $200,000?
Again, Section 3 looks at the project site. So if the project site has received over $200,000, you would have to track labor hours for that project site. If another project within the grant did not exceed 200,000, then you would not need to track it for that other site that received less than the reporting threshold.
Since labor hours are being tracked, do professional services contracts need to include Section 3 provisions or track anything? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get into the weeds on that one too much. I will say that HUD has a bit of a complicated twist in Section 3. As if this isn't already a twist enough. With professional services contracts, if you find that you're not meeting your benchmark, your 25, 20 and 5, Section 3 and targeted Section 3, there's this funny little thing that says if you happen to have professional services contracts that have Section 3 qualifying workers or businesses, you can put those on the top of your equation and not count them in the total hours of your equation. We felt that it was very unlikely that that would be the case here in Iowa, particularly with professional services that we're familiar with. If you come across professional services that may be Section 3 eligible, reach out to Stephen and we'll help you with that nuance of the equation. Shirley says, can we do the LMI survey the same way? I do not know what you mean by that, Shirley.
Shirley, would you like to unmute yourself and further explain the question?
Well, since we're doing, for this, we can do as a single individual. Can we do LMI surveys as single individuals and not households?
No. The eligible activity is low to moderate income households. This is just a strange rule outside of CDBG. It applies to all HUD, CPD, community planning and development, Section 3 does. So it does not change or affect our community development block grant rules and regulations. All right, what is considered an acceptable amount of qualitative efforts that would need to be met?
That is a great question. I would recommend for the checklist that we've done, completing at least a couple of those. You can reach out to us specifically to ask for help and guidance in implementing them, but focus on doing at least a couple of those methods very thoroughly and properly, so that we can report to HUD to show that it's all compliant. Really, it's just based upon those efforts are based upon community needs and community centered issues. So just work on doing that, a couple of those to the best of your abilities for the local area. In particular, if you're going to work on a method that's not on that list, please reach out to me and we can see if that may comply with what HUD is looking for Section 3.
From our perspective, the way that HUD has set this up in both disaster and regular program, it is part of activity closeout where we will be reporting project completion. And so we have not yet seen one of these eligible projects go through the reporting and closeout within the HUD database systems, but it appears to us that at least one box will have to be checked in order to get to the next screen. So as Stephen said, we would recommend 2 in order to make sure that when we get to closeout, we're not unable to close your project because of this. But HUD has not given direction on a minimum amount of qualitative efforts. Okay. Is HUD the only federal agency with Section 3 expectation? It is a HUD rule. So HUD is the only agency it applies to. Other agencies may have other rules, but I'm not familiar with them.
I'm not familiar either.
You mentioned tracking all hours on a job. Does that include hours worked by an owner?
Yes.
Yes.
It includes all labor hours on the project. So anyone who's working on it, be sure to track the labor hours so that we can get a full perspective for Section 3 compliance.
And that's where it will deviate from some of the other Davis-Bacon rules that you may be familiar with, because the whole point of this is not necessarily a labor standards requirement, but just truly how many hours did it take to actually do the project and how many of those hours were worked by Section 3 workers. So if you don't count all the hours, you won't have a correct ratio. Mark says, how often will we need to provide this information to Iowa grants? Annually, ? How long do we have to provide this information? Is it best practice to have it come in monthly or quarterly so that there are not significant delays? We estimate that some contractors and the general contractor will need to have payment put on hold until this information is obtained. I can log back in if it's.
I think it just stopped sharing screen off. So.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know why it did that.
So how often because HUD has 2 different data reporting systems, one for regular program and one for disaster recovery. Unfortunately, they built them differently. The regular program one, section 3 is only captured at activity close. So at the same point that you would put in your final targets, performance measures, number of units, number of public facilities, etc., you would also enter your total hours, your total section 3, your targeted section 3, and your qualitative efforts. With disaster recovery, HUD set it up where technically they built a tool to collect that quarterly. We've met internally with HUD and said, we are going to offer this program the same between our regular program, or offer the compliance tools the same between our regular program and our disaster program. Therefore, it is our intent to collect this at the end of the project. So from a grant administrative perspective, we don't really care if you update it weekly, monthly, quarterly. It's going to be kind of up to you. Certainly in some regular, in my mind, it would be easier to keep this up to date than to collect it all at the end of the project, just in terms of accuracy. But you will only update it, upload it in Iowa Grants at the end of the grant. Can section 3 language be removed from all housing sustainability contracts and publications? So only for awards where IEDA makes a housing sustainability award to a community after July 1, 2021. If you are operating under an old contract, even if you're still bidding a house, that project is still under the old rule, which still requires the old clause and the old compliance language. How is the worker's annual income determined? Is it based off the previous year's taxable income?
Stop sharing.
I don't know why it's doing that. It's crazy.
What's the question again?
We can just leave it off. We're just taking questions. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
How is the worker's annual income determined? Is it based off the previous year taxable income? Well, it's self-certification by the worker, and HUD is not giving us great guidance on this. It's not the same way they're using terminology like individual instead of household. They're also not using the sort of forward-looking 12-month data the way that they would in normal income verification. I think that HUD thinks that we're just going to gather this from the worker as of what they make today, or what they make at the time of their certification. So if they're making, $30,000 a year, based on their current pay rate, that is what they would indicate. It, again, as Stephen said, it does not have to be verified by supporting documentation. It is self-certification. So you can either get it from the employee. If they don't know, obviously the general contractor or the sub or whoever it is that is employing them can use their current pay rate and extrapolate an annual salary based on that. Again, we do this to the greatest extent feasible. Next question, if an employee has been with an employer 10 plus years, are they automatically not counted towards section 3, even if 5 years ago they were within the section 3 income limits?
Yes, they would not count as that since they've been employed for longer, since December 1st, 2020 is now our most updated HUD guidance. The rule indicates hired or within the past year or past 5 years if they met that requirement. That individual employee would have been there for 10 years, so they would not qualify based on that. But also looking at our most recent guidance from HUD, the look back period looks back to December 1st of 2020, as based on the rule wasn't implemented prior to that. So that individual worker would not count if they were within the past 10 years, or if their income, if their income has increased within the past 10 years. If they've been with that employer for a decade and they're still a Section 3 worker, they would count based on their current set income, if their current income qualifies them to be a Section 3 worker today.
Okay, could making workers aware of publicly available local transit system work as an alternative qualitative measure?
That is something that we are looking into. If that's something that you're wishing to use as a qualitative effort, feel free to reach out to me and we will discuss the specifics of making available means and what you're proposing to do to comply.
Yeah, making aware of sounds a little light from what the things that I've read. HUD is very much geared at having these things actually result in increased employment opportunities for low to moderate income workers. And so it seems like HUD might come back and say, you need a slightly more tangible thing that you're doing. But as Stephen said, we can look into it. Does every worker have to complete a certification form, or when does that apply? Do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I was just got distracted here by a question.
No, it's okay.
I think I see that now. Every worker should complete that form based upon the list. The projects that you can derive a good list of who's a Section 3 worker and who is not. If they are a Section 3 worker, please retain that for documentation's purposes.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that you really need to have everyone do it, because you need to be able to put on that spreadsheet the yes or no, and you need to be able to have the support documentation to back that up. So, you know, if I were a grant administrator and the first, you know, I have 10 people working on a project and the first 2 or 3 are Section 3, I'm not going to stop there just because I've potentially hit 25% of my crew. I'm going to get it on everybody so that I know when I log their hours that I'm tracking it correctly. Worker certification is going to be a task. I say this because if we are looking at our Davis-Bacon compliance and notice that we don't have worker certification, do we have to stop and make efforts to get the certification? Mark, I do not disagree that this is going to be a task. We completely agree that this rule, in my personal opinion, is overly burdensome. We communicated that to HUD. We have articulated the concerns, and they don't seem to, it did not change their rule. So I think that, you know, the rule, Section 3 compliance does state that we take efforts to the greatest extent feasible. We as a state see that as at least having a policy, a procedure, forms and templates in place to allow for a correct process, and that you at the local level would complete your work to the greatest extent feasible. Now, if we start seeing a bunch of spreadsheets that only have, you know, 2 workers and insufficient hours reported, we will probably have to come back at monitoring or a project closeout and request additional information. But, you know, if you have an employee who refuses and an employer who is not providing the information, I mean, because again, the employer can provide it, right? Because all you need is where the person lives and how much money they make, which an employer should know that. You know, if you can't get it, we understand these circumstances arise, but certainly we want the best data possible. Is there a reason why IEDA couldn't facilitate qualitative efforts? Compliance session during the annual CDBG recipient workshop so that everyone who gets a project during a given year could check that box up front. So we looked into what, and we talked to HUD and we talked to HUD technical assistants about if the state could do qualitative efforts. We're still trying to figure out what that looks like, but the guidance we keep getting back is that the whole point of qualitative efforts is to be as local as possible. So if we were to hold a job fair here in Des Moines that you all attended as part of our workshop, that would not assist low to moderate income workers at the location where we have a wastewater treatment project. So, you know, the guidance we're getting from HUD is that for the state to facilitate qualitative efforts, it would really have to prove that a tangible benefit was occurring at the local project site. So as Stephen said in his one slide, we are very open to ideas, collaboration. What are the councils of governments and regional planning teams already doing that might count for these things? You know, if necessary, can we provide additional technical assistance so that we can do some of those local activities? But until we know what currently works or what's currently out there, we can't propose to do it on behalf of grantees at this point.
Right, and I think we'll also provide more information at future annual workshops on Section 3 and Section 3 compliance for new awardees whenever whenever we hold those again in the future.
Yep. Okay, next question. So what happens if you did a couple of items on the qualitative effort checklist and you didn't meet the 25 and 5 requirements? Are you okay because you did the items on the checklist?
In theory, that should be okay. In theory, if you do not make the benchmark requirements for labor hours and you've completed an item or two off of the checklist, fully and sufficiently, then you should be okay for complying with Section 3. Now, we are going to require you to complete the labor hours spreadsheet to demonstrate that you did not make the hours, since that's HUD's main intention for this rule, is based upon labor hours. But yeah, you should, in theory, you should be all right, and we'll work with that when the time comes.
Yep. All right, Myrtle says, if the worker refuses to complete the certification form because it asks them to disclose their private financial information, can we just use the income figure provided by the employer?
I don't believe the form requires them to provide any personal information, private financial information. It just asks
income.
Right,
Some people consider that.
Right. I mean, if they don't provide that income, you can ask their employer what their income is, but it doesn't usually require specifics. It's usually just is your income at or below this? And if not, the employer could provide that figure. We would prefer if the employee signs the document either way, so if they are providing their own certification of that.
Okay, Isaiah asked, what is considered a community? Is that the specific city that the project is located in, or a broader based on county, region, etc.? Isaiah, is your question regarding targeted Section 3 workers and the geographic location to the project, or is it some other reference to community? Or is it in the qualitative efforts?
It's more in the qualitative efforts. I'm just wondering if we have to do those qualitative efforts specifically in that city, or like if it's a small town, can we go county or even more broadly as a region and count that, or how does that look?
I would think, thanks for your question. I think if it depends upon like the circumstances of a community, such as, if it's a very small town and workers, people from that town go to other communities for, they're part of a wider region based upon their community nature, I think that could work. If they're a larger town and your council of government's based out of another town, maybe it should be in the town that the project is in. I think that'll just depend on the community circumstances and what qualitative efforts you're using.
Yeah. So Rick's next question it points a nail on the head. And one of the comments that we actually made to HUD was that a lot of our projects probably are not going to be hiring for these projects. That's the same thing we found with the old Section 3 rule, is that we did not have a lot of new hires. And really, as we've all gone through the rule, it is very much written for urban public housing projects. And so we are trying to take a rule that was written for urban public housing projects and create compliance in rural communities. So Rick writes, given some contractors may have small crews, a job fair may not be the best option as a standalone event in the community, right? Because you don't want to have a job fair if there are no jobs. Could a general job fair at a workforce center or another node, like a county seat, count if the contractor takes part? I mean, I would think yes. I think that's an excellent example. I think we struggle with how valuable these qualitative efforts are if we are not actually creating jobs. So one of them is maybe things like, and again, this becomes more regional or more administrative, not so much something that the physical construction contractor would do, but some of the qualitative efforts are even, resume assistance or helping people seek job opportunities or other kinds of assistance for low to moderate income workers, not necessarily just job fairs where we may not have job opportunities available.
Right. I think one of the qualitative efforts, if I'm correct, is reference connecting Section 3 workers to higher education or apprenticeships or other employment opportunities. So I think that would be an excellent way to, you can connect Section 3 eligible workers with other work opportunities to advance their careers and skills and talents.
So Chris asks, do we still have to include the Section 3 clause in various documents? So the Section 3 clause, certainly applicable to old rule projects. HUD did not issue a revised clause in the rule, but they expect us and all grantees across the country to revise the clause ourselves. So in Chapter 8 of the Management Guide, as Stephen referenced, there is a revised clause. You will probably need to use that clause in advertisements and publications for scopes of work, because it's going to outline the requirement of reporting labor hours. So we still want that clause to be part of procurement, so that no one bidding on the work is surprised when you come to them and say, now I have to track all of your labor hours. So there is a revised clause. It's in the management guide. You should use it moving forward with all new projects.
And Rose, I did look at your Venn diagram on here, and I would say that's a correct way of looking at it.
Yep, HUD has a similar graph, so nice work, Rose. Yes, Myrtle found the revised clause that refers to Part 75 instead of 135.
Yep,
Thanks, Chris.
All that is in Chapter 8 Index A files on the Student Management Guide website.
It's all been updated on the Management Guide. So use our clause. Don't just Google it, because every grantee in the country has revised their clause their own way. Mm-hmm. Brilliant work, HUD. Mm-hmm. Okay, Caleb has a question about Rose's diagram. Do those 3 criteria in the targeted Section 3 workers all need to be met, or just one of the 3?
Just one needs to be met. They either need to be a current youth build participant, they either have to work for a Section 3 business, or they have to live within a radius of 5,000 people. So only one of those 3 conditions needs to be met for them to be considered a targeted Section 3 worker. That'll most likely be the service area of 5,000 people, which in Iowa will probably always be over 1 mile. So use the we'll let you know when HUD releases the tool, but just try to use as best available information as you can to show that.
Perhaps IEDA can provide IWD with a list of grantees who must comply with the new rule. Further, this requirement could be presented to RWIB staff so that they may ask to be part of a solution of these projects. One way IEDA can show qualitative statewide effort would be to lead with some more coordination locally. It's a good idea.
It's a good idea, and I would encourage you all to work with your local Iowa workforce development offices as well to coordinate some of these opportunities to Section 3 workers or other resources that may be provided by Iowa workforce development to eligible Section 3 employees or residents who may help with complying with the qualitative efforts.
Yeah, so there was a comment, sorry, we skipped one about supporting income verification with tax returns. When we initially wrote the rule, or when we initially approached compliance with the rule, because it was income verification, we assumed that there would be some element of check. We have heard from HUD that self-certification is sufficient. So there is no requirement to check tax returns or income statements or any other documentation. Sorry, we skipped you about that. All right, that's the end of my comment question list. If anybody has a question that they weren't able to add to chat and they want to unmute, they're welcome to do that now.
Hello, this is Liz Kemp at ECIA.
Hey, Liz.
I just need clarification because of the timing of when this rule went into effect. We have a project that went to contract before the rule went into effect as a project, but the construction contracts and project really haven't gotten started until after July of 2021. So do we do the old Section 3 or the new Section 3?
You're going to make me go on record a second time in a row saying this. We have established the parameter, IEDA established the parameter of July 1, 2021 for both an award from IEDA to a community and entering into construction contracts with contractors. So both of those things have to be true.
Okay.
And have occurred after July 1, 2021 for the new rule to apply.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome. And that's the consistent answer we gave back in June as well.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. All right, thank you. You guys feel free to email me any other additional questions you may have. I appreciate your time this afternoon as we discuss this rule and their new templates and answer some questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all very much.